Hi, everyone. Hopefully more people join. I don't want to talk to 48 people, but I think some more will join. So I'm here yet again, once again, to talk about quote-unquote peptides. It seems like peptides won't die, but maybe some of the people taking them will. Bad joke. I think that the LARPing has gone too far. Some of you guys want to LARP as programmers and use Claude Code. That's cool. That's cool. Some of you want to LARP when you're mechanics, pretend you know how to fix a car, just make that shit worse. Some of you even LARP, I don't know, in the gym or something. But one thing you shouldn't do is LARP with medicine. That's when I show up. No, you can't. I'm not letting you LARP with medicine. Because I take it seriously, as you should. You should all take medicine seriously. And when you LARP with medicine, bad things happen. We used to LARP with medicine, believe it or not. We LARPed in the, I would say before 1950. Medicine was basically just a big LARP. It didn't work. The best we had was stuff that, worked empirically and had been passed down from generations. Willow bark, things like that. And St. John's wort. And then we started to figure out that we should probably test medicine carefully before we just hand it out. It would be good because we don't want people to just take drugs that don't work. But a lot of you guys want to go back to the pre-1950s. I don't understand it. I think maybe we are entering such an era of distrust of authority that we'd rather not even test medicine before taking it than trust some third party or authority like the FDA or the US government, which is insane. We, in the medicine field, we look back at a world before clinical trials with shame. That there ever existed a time where we would just sort of take drugs and have what was called snake oil. There's literally snake oil salesmen. And you want to go back to that era. Why? How could that possibly be beneficial to anybody? We've evolved and progressed over time. To go backwards is so regressionary and so foolish. And watching people do it, including some smart people, mostly idiots, but a few smart people are peptide curious, peptide adjacent. It's a shame. The 1950s gave way to the pharmaceutical industry became an important thing. Opioids were synthesized, so were steroids. We started to understand biology. The X-ray crystallography that discovered the structure of DNA made us curious about what else was in our bodies. Maybe we could think about how this DNA gives rise to proteins, and then modify those proteins. Slowly but surely, we even started to unravel the secrets of DNA in the genome. We were able to determine that certain enzymes mattered a lot to the human body, like HMG-CoA reductase, which, when inhibited, dramatically lowers cholesterol. Probably saved millions of lives. But there's even people out there that question if statins work. I think that the last 20 years of politics and society has made people question a lot of things. We question whether or not the government should be involved in any part of our life. We question whether the media is all a big scam and they feed us lies. And some of those things are good to question. But medicine is something that we've honed and fine-tuned for hundreds of years. And the double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial is virtually the only way to tell if a drug works or not. When you take a drug, or what you think is a drug, which sullies the name pharmaceutical or drug by pretending that it is one, when you take a drug and you think you're getting better, you haven't really proven anything. At least to, a modern, scholastic, educated professional, you may think that you've gotten better, but the problem is, I've been studying clinical trials for 26 years. I've one of the biggest traders in the history of finance and clinical trials. And I can tell you that a lot of the times, unblinded studies are very persuasive. And you think that maybe they'll replicate when controlled, and then they don't. And then, of course, there are times when they do. But in general, they're extremely unreliable. And certainly, an N of 1 is just an embarrassment. It really depends on the study and the situation. I don't completely ignore certain, N of 1 or small group studies. I'll give you an example. I invented a chemical series of phosphopanothenates. These were phosphoramidate McGuigan chemistry for anybody in the field. So we made these Peptides, and they were there to rescue the phenotype of a disease called pecan, where the patient literally cannot make that phospho-B5. That's it. That's what they're missing. This is a vitamin to them. B5 is a vitamin to the rest of us. But you only eat B5 in your foods so that you can phosphorylate it with pantothenate kinase. Well, these patients have a mutation in pantothenate kinase. So we figured, let's phosphorylate the substrate for them. So we add the phosphorus ourselves and give it to the patient. Easy peasy, right? It should be a cure, like, a vitamin disorder, like vitamin A deficiency or vitamin C deficiency or anything like that, right? Vitamin D. Did it work? Well, we made the drug and we put it in humans. Now the problem is, I was trying to go public at the time, or I was public, but I was trying to do a financing. And we rushed this molecule into humans. I'm not 100% proud of that, but I thought there was a chance it could work. But the reality was that the way we did the peptide chemistry wasn't fantastic, and this was a drug that was going to rapidly degrade into into just B5, and that the ester modification we made was just going to get cleaved immediately, hydrolyzed. And so I knew the drug wasn't going to work. I knew that the protective group we made was just shoddy, and we needed to make a new molecule. This isn't uncommon. There's fourth generation drugs in some cases. So I worked on a second generation drug, but a funny thing happened. We did 8 patients in compassionate use. My chief medical officer was an expert in rare diseases and drug development. In fact, he was, I think, one of the best guys out there. He worked at Genzyme, helping get those rare disease drugs approved, and Alexion, which was probably the most successful rare disease drug company of all time. He was a gifted pediatrician, and he saw with his own eyes patients that he thought were recovering dramatically. He even recorded videos and showed us. I sat in our boardroom and I shook my head and I said, I don't think so. I invented this freaking drug. And I knew the biology. I knew that if you replaced phospho-B5 in these patients, you would cure them. You would go from a deep neurological disease to somebody who should rapidly get better immediately. But as I stared at these patient testimonials and videos of these poor, decrepit people who were so brutalized by this illness, I still thought that the odds that this drug worked were close to zero. My chief medical officer said he was so sure, he had never been more sure that a drug worked. But I knew better. I knew better because I'd bet, I don't know, at that point, in the aggregate of billions of dollars on clinical trials. I know some other hedge funds, maybe like Perceptive or Kevin Tang, have maybe even bet more. But I think I'd be in the top 10. I'd been doing this for 20 some odd years. At that point, maybe 15 at hedge funds with my own money and things like that. And I said, I don't think this drug works. The biology isn't there, or the chemistry isn't there. The biology is there. The chemistry is not there, and we need to do another drug. I ended up leaving that company over other reasons. The company, so did the chief medical officer. The company decided to invest $200 million doing a phase 3 of this clinical trial. Before the trial results came out, I repeated my prediction, which I often do on Twitter. It's one of the reasons I have a lot of followers, is I have an uncanny ability to determine whether or not a drug is going to work. I've been wrong the amount of times maybe you can count on a hand, if that. And this drug didn't work. It had no difference from placebo. It wasn't even close. I think placebo maybe even have beat the drug. Why is it that sometimes when we give drugs to patients, even experienced medical professionals, let alone the layman, don't know why a drug may look like it works when it doesn't? Well, there's a lot of reasons. What's important isn't that I list out the reasons and explain them to you. What's important is that you wake the fuck up and stop pretending you're a medical specialist and you trust your doctor. When I have a legal problem, I don't sit and pass the bar, do you? When my toilet's clogged, I don't go become a plumber. Do you? No. We trust the people that know what the fuck they're doing. Why have we stopped doing that? Why have we wanted to reach for peptides, quote unquote? What is a peptide? Can anybody explain it? I can, of course, because this is my life. But most people who take quote unquote peptides just use them as a shorthand for some kind of miracle drug. Of course, a peptide is just a polymer, a small polymer. What's it a polymer of? Well, amino acids, of course. A large polymer of amino acids is called a protein. A small polymer is called a peptide. Do you think any of these people know this? It's the most trivial part of it all, of course. But it's sad to see that people get brainwashed that a peptide is something special. Of course it is not. Saying that a peptide is special is kind of like saying for the first time you saw a car and it was called a Toyota. And you all of a sudden started to use the term Toyota to mean any car. So you said, well, we have to go downtown. Let's go jump in a Toyota. And somebody looked at you and said, what? What do you mean? Well, we have to go downtown. We can't walk. I don't want to take the subway. Let's get in a Toyota. They said, do you mean get in a car or an automobile? They said, no, the Toyota. A Toyota. We need to get in a Toyota. It's the best. The Toyotas are better. Are you saying Toyotas are better than cars? Yes. All of them? Don't you know that Toyotas are cars? And you have this back and forth with this person who clearly is an alien, who doesn't understand anything about medicine. But they're sure. They're so sure of their peptide working. And it boggles my mind because on every level, the scientific vacuousness of pretending that some drug like BPC, quote unquote drug like BPC 157 is a real thing, and the conflation of a pharmaceutical drug like Ozempic, which of course it's actually not even a peptide, it's a very heavily modified fusion peptide. It's not a natural peptide. GLP-1 was given a long time ago. In fact, I remember 25 years ago when a company called Amylin, which is named after a different peptide, a gut peptide called amylin, was developing exenatide, which is the Gila monster venom GLP-1. And when human GLP-1 came out, both Gila monster GLP-1 and human GLP-1 were quite weak. They don't really do a lot. And the reason for this is, well, look around. We all have GLP-1 endogenously and we make it, but we still seem to gain a lot of weight. And when we add exogenous GLP, it doesn't help that much. We have to supercharge it. We have to make its half-life longer. We have to do all kinds of things because peptides have actually very poor physiochemical properties. They're terrible. Drug people hate peptides. Why? Well, the amino acid bonds that create the polymer from the monomers of amino acids, they're very weak. And they're very, very subject to proteases and peptidases. Those are enzymes that break up peptides. So these peptides don't last very long in the human body. In fact, they're laughably short. Pharmaceutical drugs need to last in the bloodstream to work. That makes sense, doesn't it? When you have a drug, it's supposed to kind of press a button molecularly, if that makes sense. And when it presses the button, a good thing happens. But if the drug gets destroyed minutes after it's given to the patient, well, it can't press the button very much, now can it? So what do? In pharmaceuticals, well, we basically take the peptide and start to chisel out some of the places where it's going to be cleaved. And all of a sudden, we have a drug, a small molecule, a non-peptidic drug. In fact, I would say quite a number of pharmaceutical drugs started off as peptides, and we edited out the shitty parts of them because they're sort of traditionally very shitty. BPC 157 has a half-life that I estimate to be about 10 minutes, which makes it almost impossible that it would work. Now, almost impossible is the siren song for the retard. The retard hears almost impossible and says, just like in the film Dumb and Dumber, so you're telling me there's a chance. And it's not only so you're telling me there's a chance, but there is a drug or two out there with 10-minute half-lives and they work, therefore my peptide also works. Unfortunately, yes, Michael Jordan can dunk a basketball. He's human, so am I. I can no longer dunk a basketball as I'm fat and old. Even in my best youth, I could barely dunk a basketball. So, because there's an exception, the NBA players dunk basketballs with ease, perhaps I should assume that all humans do. Of course, this is faulty logic, and anyone can see that. But the peptide bro can't, or refuses to do so, because the power and the lure of peptides is so strong that they're blinded to everything. After all, you'd have to be crazy to take medicine into your own hands. You certainly wouldn't do your own surgery now, would you? I have on my wrist something called a cyst. It's something that could easily be surgically repaired. Should I do it myself? What do you guys think? Would that be smart? No, it would be very not smart. It's called a ganglion cyst. I've researched them carefully. I know my way around medicine. I think I can do it. But am I going to do it? No, I'm not that stupid. But peptide bros want to be stupid. There's something about medicine they look at and say, I can figure this out. I know this. Let me try this and see what happens. And I think it's the excitement, the excitement of trying something and you don't know what's going to happen. It's a little bit Darwinian and of rapid self-selection out of the gene pool, but it's something that for some people, they're fed up with something in life. They're fed up with regulations. They're fed up with government. They're fed up with authority, people telling them what to do, doctors. Who likes doctors? And so they decide that they're going to take matters into their own hands. But they wouldn't do it for anything that counted. So they're still chicken shit. Do your own surgery, then I'll be impressed. Fix your own car. Do your own plumbing. I don't know. Do things like that, and then I'll not stifle a yawn. Because I know my chemistry, and I know BPC 157 disintegrates into its constituent amino acids within minutes. It can't hurt you. You want to be a real maverick, take random small molecules. You want to be a real maverick, make your own. Taking peptides doesn't make you brave or intelligent. It actually just, kind of reinforces how little you know about medicine. But again, peptides work, don't they? Sure. Drug companies like mine have made peptides for decades. Like I said, they're very poor, kind of shitty molecules. Now, why do we use them for GLPs? Well, GLPs aren't exactly peptides. There's a peptide backbone, but the amount of modification that's been made to these peptides by pharmaceutical chemists, Novo or Lilly, basically renders them almost unrecognizable as peptides. Sure, you still see the amino acid sequence, but the amount of modifications to make them high quality. For example, the peptides that Lilly had before their latest, Trulicity and Zepbound and Mounjaro, was called Trulicity, dulaglutide. And dula was really funny. It had an FC region as its half-life extender. Today, people just use these fatty acid linkers, and Lilly moved to the Novo style. But first, Lilly kind of made this like peptibody, a phrase that Amgen coined 20 years ago. So you can combine the specificity of peptides with the half-life of an antibody, and that was smart. Today, they edit the peptides down to do something else. When people say peptides, I don't think they mean pharmaceutical quality compounds that have been tested and billions of dollars have been spent on them. No. I think they mean something they read on Reddit, something that makes them feel smart. In psychology, there's a phrase called apophenia. And apophenia is basically where conspiracy theories come from. Apophenia is this idea that you have the explanation, that you know that the Twin Towers was an inside job. You know that Osama bin Laden was actually a CIA puppet. How do you know? Well, you're in the know. And it makes you feel good that some complex thing, like a terrorist attack or a drug, is something that you have the explanation for. Everyone else has to go to medical school or wonder why in the world did a terrorist attack happen and was unable to be stopped. And instead of just figuring that, it's an inexplicable tragedy and the Saudi, nationals maybe funded a terrorist cell that bin Laden supported and the traditional theory, oh, no, you won't accept that. That means that you're giving into authority. That means that you're a sheep. I know the real story. How? Well, everyone knows the real story, don't you? This type of thinking, apophenic thinking, is the same thing that makes astrology appealing to people. It's too hard to just accept that the world is random and hard and shitty and there's exceptions for everything. It would be nice if you didn't need to study much to learn medicinal chemistry, that if it was a one-page thing, that'd be great, or computer programming. But the reality is, for every parable in medicinal chemistry, there's an exception. Every time you think you have computer programming down, you figure out that, oh, actually, I shouldn't use this kind of data structure in this situation. And you learn all these exceptions over time. That's called experience. Apophenic thinking is when you just don't want to believe authority. Authority would tell you that your personality traits are pretty hard to determine. But the horoscope can tell you them immediately. It's a lot cooler when you think that you have the answer that nobody else does, and it's mysterious, and it explains everything. Peptides are a little like that. There's no need to go to medical school. There's no need to become a chemist. I read it on Reddit, after all. These Reddit people must know. The pharmaceutical companies, well, how could they know? What would be their incentive to make sure their medicine works? Couldn't be billions of dollars. So the apophenic or apophenia victim, and I truly think it's a mental disorder, decides that, oh, they know because they're in the know. And it makes them feel good because the world is messy and complicated and difficult. But when you feel like you're in the know and nobody can tell you otherwise, you feel a power. You feel like you can exclude people. And you also feel affiliation with the people who are also in the know, fellow astrologers, fellow peptiders, who say, oh, yes, you tried BPC 157 too. Oh, I had great results with it. How? Who knows? Biology? Not there. Chemistry? Not there either. Clinical trials, God forbid? No, none. So why? Why endorse something? Because the same reason kids dye their hair green, or the same reason I took up skateboarding when I was 13. I want to be different. I want to be cool. I want to know something and do something nobody else does. But unfortunately, it's time to grow up. And when you, unfortunately, get older, or God forbid, you get afflicted with a serious illness, guess what you're not going to do? You're not going to take peptides you found on Reddit. You're going to go to an oncologist or a serious physician. And you're not going to make your drugs in your basement or buy them from China. You're going to get them from Merck and Eli Lilly because it's just a LARP. When things get serious, at the end of the day, you're LARPing. And I can tell because I've been through it and I have seen it. And when it comes to your loved ones or your child, you're not going to go on Reddit and look for a peptide. And if you are, you're being very negligent. I know there probably are a few people who will. But chances are you're going to snap out of it and say, you know what? I'm going to ask a professional. I'm going to ask a physician. I'm going to ask a chemist or a pharmaceutical person. What's new in the pipeline for pancreatic cancer? My friend, my former office manager, was just diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I'm pleading with her to take the new drug from Revolution Medicines. The drug doubles overall survival for PDAC, form of pancreatic cancer. It's a miracle drug. And the people that worked on Revolution Medicines will be highly rewarded. They're going to make billions of dollars. They have. The market cap of the company is $40 billion. Their hard work is denigrated when we talk about things like BPC 157 as if they're the same thing. Their hard work using computers to design drugs, using xenografts and animal models to determine if they might work, studying protein for literally 20 years, trying to unravel the secrets of RAS, the GTPase that controls pancreatic cancer. It's insulting when some bro on Reddit pretends that a drug works. It's almost like a meme. It's like a 4chan thing. And those people that actually worked hard to make medicine, it's insulting because we need people like that who make real medicine that doubles the survival of people who are dying of pancreatic cancer. What we don't need is to pretend things like BPC 157, which is my prototypical peptide, quote unquote peptide, that those are actually medicines, because they're not. If they were medicines, one reasonable assumption is that drug companies like mine would pounce on them. We do all kinds of stupid things in medicine. I failed so many different clinical trials and abandoned so many different drugs over the years. But we keep trying because sometimes they mature and become real medicines. My first medicine, sparsentan, which I named, is now almost a blockbuster drug with over $1 billion in revenue. It's approved for the treatment of focal segmental glomerulosclerosis and IgA nephropathy, something I planned it about 16 years ago. And over 16 years, the plan came true. And I'm one of the few people who could say they got a drug FDA approved. Peptide bros cannot say that. They don't know what it takes to get a drug FDA approved. The amount of doubt you have internally, externally, the FDA, investors, doctors, it's hard. A lot of things can go wrong. But eventually, some of these drugs do get approved, and they're usable. Shortcutting that whole process because you have this psychological disorder is unhealthy, and it's bad for everybody. It doesn't help anybody. This is why we moved on from snake oil, because people used to do this in the 1920s and 30s. It's been a long time, but you can read books about people who used to pack their caravans with snake oil and pretend that they were cures to things. They would run around and sell from state to state different snake oils. Though this tincture will cure your melancholy. Do we want to go back to that? Why? We have science. We have modern medicine. It's a miracle. Cystic fibrosis has been functionally cured by a company in Boston called Vertex. It took a lot of tries, a lot of effort, but people with cystic fibrosis no longer die. That's a miracle. Let's not go backwards in time. One of the smartest people I know mentioned, Martin, I think you're too negative on peptides. I said, okay, why? He said, well, medicine started with people trying random stuff, and sometimes it worked. Well, that's true. But we have better methods now. And while that method may still work from time to time, and we shouldn't ignore evidence, we should put that drug where there is evidence into clinical trials. And by the way, I've done this. Ketamine was a drug that I spearheaded for suicidality and treatment-resistant depression. We ran a race with a startup called Johnson & Johnson. At Yale, Dr. Carlos Zarate seemed to discover that ketamine induced a rapid cessation of depression symptoms. It was incredible. It was too good to be true. No one with the right mind would invest in this, right? I plunged forward. It was uncontrolled data too, by the way. What did I do? I didn't set up a ketamine clinic to start treating people. No, I planned a double-blind placebo-controlled study to see if it was real. So did Johnson & Johnson. They won. That drug now sells $2 billion a year. It's intranasal ketamine. But there are plenty of people that tried to pirate it and pawn it off and do the wrong thing with medicine. You could have done a clinical trial. You could have given people ketamine off-label. But the right thing to do is to try to get the proof that it worked. Instead, what I see from the peptide quote-unquote industry, including companies like Hims and others, is that they don't want to do that. They don't want the truth as to whether the drug works or not. Why would we want the truth to get in the way of the revenue? If we proved whether the drug worked or not, well, first of all, we couldn't sell any medicine, quote-unquote, between now and then. We want to sell it now, don't we? A trial is going to take years. Trials tend to fail. They're very difficult to do. Sometimes you do a clinical trial and you don't see the effect you want, but you see another tantalizing effect. Well, then you have to do another clinical trial to prove that that effect was real. This merry-go-round can take place until you run out of capital. Professional investors won't fund something like this. So let's just sell it as if it worked anyway. Think about how insane that is. Instead of trying to do the right thing and say, hey, I think this thing might work. Let me go find some, I don't know, venture capitalists or pharmaceutical companies or something. Let's go test it. Let's prove it. Let's do a placebo-controlled study. When you do a placebo-controlled study with Vertex's drug, the patients can breathe again. It's amazing. The placebo patients can't breathe anymore. Still. They still have cystic fibrosis. You do the trial and you do something called a statistical test, like a t-test or a chi-squared test. And you can prove with a measure of certainty that there's no way that 55 cystic fibrosis patients would all of a sudden start breathing better, while the other 55 who took placebo didn't improve at all. The only explanation is that the drug works. But you have to use statistics. You can't simply say, well, I ordered this stuff online and I guess I feel better, so it must be working. That's not science. That's foolish. And it sets us backwards. So I hope that trends like this will go away. You know, we don't trust the media for very good reason. But we need to get that back. It's not like we should disband the media. We should regain the trust. We don't trust the FDA a little bit. I do, but a lot of people don't. Well, we have to earn that trust back immediately, or we go back to snake oil. We go back to the tincture in my caravan, my horse-drawn caravan. This will cure your melancholy. The guy only cares about selling you tincture. He doesn't care about your melancholy. We need to make sure that we regain these trusts in politicians and everything, in all society, financials, whatever. Because if we think the system is rigged and that actually 9/11 was an insider job you didn't know, well, first of all, jet fuel can't melt steel beams, and second of all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I became an expert on buildings and physics all of a sudden. Am I an expert on building and physics? No, I'm not. I'm an expert in chemistry, and biology, and pharmacology. And when I see people try to LARP that they're that expert all of a sudden, and I ask them, how many drugs have you worked on? How many drug companies have you started? How many drugs have you gotten approved? How many billions of dollars have you bet on clinical trials successfully? The answer is none. Why are you selling peptides? Because you want to make money. And you want to find any rube that'll buy some joke of a drug that never got FDA approval. Now, one reasonable explanation is that there are drugs in this twilight of pharmaceuticals and recreational/cosmeceutical medicines. There is a space for that, like Botox. What does Botox do outside of its medical use? For its cosmetic use, it's still FDA approved. And the label says something interesting. It's for the improvement, I believe it says something like, for the visual improvement of glabellar lines. Makes your face look nicer. Great. You can get a cosmeceutical approved. It's not easy. The FDA has rejected that some things are diseases. It, for example, recognizes erectile dysfunction as an illness. It doesn't recognize premature ejaculation as an illness. So if you suffer from PE, you're screwed. I guess not literally. You need to find a way to treat your PE. Now again, the FDA says, what's the problem? You can still copulate. But if it's a psychosocial problem that affects you deeply, I believe that's a disease. But the FDA will not approve any drugs for premature ejaculation. They just don't think that it's a medical issue. Well, bodybuilding is similar. We were one of the first companies to explore SARMs with our partner Ligand. If you look into sparsentan, you'll notice that I bought it from a company called Ligand. Ligand also had a bunch of SARMs. We considered buying their SARMs. They wanted to sell them to us. The problem is SARMs have never been FDA approved. Why? Well, they're used by cyclists and people that want to bodybuild. They're basically androgens. They're a lot like testosterone. So why aren't they FDA approved? No drug company can find a legitimate use for them is the problem. There's no disease called I need to be bigger. There's no disease for needing to be stronger. What we tried to do is think about, and we never pulled the trigger, but we thought about, could we develop this for patients with cancer who have cachexia, patients with ALS? We couldn't really get there that the muscle building would, one, happen, or two, that it'd be clinically beneficial. So we never developed it. But sure, there are gym bros that like this stuff and need this stuff. Do they need it? No. Do they want it? Sure. Should they have it? That's not my call. But some of these drugs are peptidic. But that doesn't make them special. As I said earlier, there's no special thing about being a peptide. You could also have a small molecule or a large molecule. EPO, for example, erythropoietin, is used by people for blood doping. EPO creates red blood cells. It raises your hemoglobin and hematocrit. It's a protein. You don't go around talking about proteins. You talk about peptides because you don't know the difference. And there's plenty of small molecules that'll do the trick too. But peptides is the term that has taken hold. So you go forth and spew about peptides. But at the end of the day, you just want things that you can't have and secrets that you and your insider crew know, and you form this in-group, this apophenia in-group that everyone's excluded from because you think you've learned something and that you're special. And you also probably believe or would believe in astrology too. That's my spiel. I'm happy to take some questions or discuss further. We'll start with you. Okay then. I have brought you to the stage. You may now speak. Hello. This isn't the best software in the world. Hari, you're on stage.
Hey, Mr. Shkreli,
Hello.
you able to hear me? Hello, hey. Thank you for doing this. I joined a few of I joined another one. So so basically, I just want to start off by saying a lot of your arguments, like sure they may be, correct, like, and you had a long career navigating the FDA and starting drugs and stuff, but I'm trying to understand why you're saying they're bad as opposed to just that they don't work. Like everything you're saying, it sounds like they should just be researched more.
Well, all drugs are researched, right? I mean, when you make a molecule, you go through a battery of tests before it's suitable for human use. If we avoid that battery of tests and say we just screw the battery, I just want the inventions, any reasonable chemist or inventor would say, whoa, 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 I don't know that this thing works. We have to test it further. But if you want to circumvent that, you actually kind of deprive the people who are going to end up needing it. So I think it's important to follow the prescribed kind of set of tests we have. Cheating is not good. I think that peptides, quote unquote, or unapproved medicines, or some people use the term research chemicals, RCs. I mean, it's just a weird thing to do. Why would you want to try a drug that's not FDA approved for a disease you don't have? And now, if you're sick and dying and you're desperate, look, all the more power to you. But that's not what you see. Most of what you see out there is, I don't know, just strange to me at least.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So your argument is more that people should have a more, or you have a more conservative approach to medicines that aren't as well researched or that don't have FDA approval, and
This
people should be
is
more cautious when taking,
this
you
is
know.
like saying if there was an epidemic of people jumping off roofs, that I have a more conservative approach to physics and not falling off buildings. I mean, think about how crazy that sounds.
I mean,
I,
you're
I
saying why they don't work. You're not saying why they're bad for you necessarily.
well, taking drugs that are not FDA approved and have no proof that they work is insane. If you don't see that, I don't know how to help you. I mean, it's totally batshit.
But
Why would
okay,
somebody do that?
let's set the FDA aside for a second. You're saying that they should be tested and they should be
Well,
verified
what's
that it's
they? All
safe
drugs,
enough for
all
you.
drugs are tested. Drugs must be tested. That's a tautology. A drug is not a drug if it's not tested. It's just a random ass molecule. I mean,
Okay,
I can make a
sure.
random peptide, but why would you take it
But
unless there's
why would we
evidence?
call it a drug? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
sure. But so then test it. The solution is to test it.
drug companies test molecules all the time. There's millions and millions of molecules in PubMed. You can only afford to test so many. The most promising ones get tested.
Okay, so it's a logistical and resources problem.
It's not a
That
problem.
that
I don't see
was
the
not a
I
problem.
don't see the problem at all. Drug companies invest in the medicines that are the most promising.
Okay, and okay, and then you're making a point how it's like who's taking this for a disease as opposed to for optimization. That's just a question of are we developing drugs for optimization or are we developing drugs for survival?
what does optimization mean? That sounds ridiculous to me at least.
I mean, it's a little bit vague, but that's kind of the point. It's whatever the user wants to optimize for. No, there's no disease called I need to be bigger, but maybe for whatever reason you want to be bigger, right? But the FDA is not really concerned with these types of problems. They're more concerned with keeping people alive.
Nor are drug companies.
Nor are drug companies. So like that's not really a point that peptides are bad. It's just a difference between ideologies of the FDA and the people who want to use peptides.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that again. Like I go back to my people jumping off buildings ideology. You might have the ideology that it's smart to jump off buildings. I'd say if you want to get bigger, you can go pump some iron.
Yeah, sure. Like, yeah, fair. And it's like, yeah, but
I mean, it's just
now
crazy to me though, like
why are they jumping off a bridge? You
because
don't know that because we haven't hasn't been tested.
well,
You don't know what they're doing.
taking BPC 157, which the chance that that drug does anything is close to zero, and pretending that it might work, well, maybe it's not as crazy as suicide, but it's kind of like,
It's delusional. You're saying it's
yeah, it's
delusional.
pretty delusional, yeah.
That's fair. Yeah. That's not that jumping off a bridge is worse than delusional.
Yeah, I'd say
That's
it's like
insane.
it walking around pretending astrology is real. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
I,
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe I take the bridge.
That's funny as hell. But okay, yeah, valid points.
I'd
Now
rather
okay,
see the
now here's one
world.
thing.
I think I'd rather see the world for what it is than
Yeah, same.
pretend that I somehow can apply my logic to the world and hope
And
that
shove it
it
down other people's throats. Yeah,
hope
fuck it.
that it
Yeah,
sticks. Yeah.
yeah. Nah, I'm with you. Now here's one thing. Who who is saying the FDA is the one who decides the bar on what's good or bad or what's what's good for survival or what's good for optimization or whatever the fuck, like I
Well,
think
again,
I think the FDA is a little bit conservative with it
well, you're going
to be
back
like
to the
okay.
word optimization, which again, that's not what a drug is. A drug is a molecule that has been proven to help some disease. Until then, unless you have that, you know, you have you don't have a drug, right? You have a guess. And
Sure, if that's how we're defining a drug, then yeah, it's a guess. Even
yeah,
if it is approved, it's still a guess because you still don't know if it's gonna treat you necessarily.
yeah, I think we just have like pretty far apart opinions, like on, like you said, if that's how you define a drug, my man, there's no special way to define a drug. There's one way to define what a drug is. It is a medicine when given to a patient that has been proven to work for a disease. That is what a drug is. There's no
Sure,
special way of
like
defining a drug.
well, you get now we getting into like what communication and like what it means to define something. Like okay, some people would call drugs fucking weed, bro. That's doesn't cure anything. That just gets you high. But we're not talking about that. We choose and let's take your definition of drug right now and establish that. We don't need
That
to
is the
argue that.
definition of a drug. You
Yes,
don't get
great.
to
We're on
have
the
a
same page. It don't matter.
you don't get to have a special definition of drug.
Nobody gets to define anything. That's a whole different problem. That's not even what this is about. We already agree on the
Like I
definition.
said earlier, if you want to change medicine to go back to the way it was before the 1960s, well, you know what? Maybe we should go back to slavery too. Maybe we should go do everything differently. You know,
Okay, yeah, yeah. No,
I
I'm with it. I don't think we differ too much actually. But yeah, okay. So now you're saying the FDA has to approve something for it to be considered like
I think it's the best thing we've got. You know, I mean, I've
that's
worked.
fair. That's I think that's a more grounded argument to say that it's the best thing we've got.
I mean, it's
But
pretty.
it's
The
all
FDA is
in the
pretty
same.
good.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
The
But in the
whole
same
world.
light, one could argue that they may disagree with what the FDA has to say on whether some random chemical should be considered a drug or
Well,
not.
the best way to look at this is see what Japan does, who has their own FDA called MHRA, or what Europe does, who has their own FDA called the EMEA. Shockingly, all of the good drugs seem to get approved by all three of them. Occasionally, there was a drug approved today, it was actually rejected by EMEA, but it was approved by the FDA. We tend to be the least conservative of the agencies. We tend to give a lot of leeway to rare disease drugs that kind of don't work because we feel really bad for the patients and we want them to have something. Maybe it gives them hope, but it's not giving them a treatment. And the Europeans hate this idea. They generally feel that if a drug doesn't work, we shouldn't sugarcoat it. It just doesn't fucking work. And we're not going to pay for it. And we're not going to approve it. And we'll just spend the time and money on shit that does work. And that's what
Yeah.
they did with this drug for a terrible, horrible rare disease called Niemann-Pick C. Niemann-Pick C has no treatment. It's fatal. Kids die from this disease every year. And
Huh.
you got to feel bad for them. But Europe's attitude is, no, we feel bad, but we're not going to give them snake oil. And the
Because
FDA
it doesn't
said,
fucking work.
yeah, and, it's a waste of time and money for everyone involved. And
Okay, so
the
perhaps
FDA,
there's a possibility we could get it to work, but we're not interested in pursuing that.
no, drugs either work or they don't. You can't get it to work. I mean, you have to make a brand new drug.
Yeah, you have to develop another one.
Yeah, you
So
have to
that's
start from scratch. And
yeah. Okay, sure.
the FDA
Regardless.
approved this drug anyway, and people are taking it in America. So, if anything, and this, by the way, is universal across many different medicines. There's no medicine that's approved, for example, in Europe, but not approved here. That's vanishingly rare. While there's tons of medicines that are approved here, but not approved in other areas of the world because they're more conservative and they want to see real evidence. So we are pretty flexible. I think that where we draw the line is stuff like a BPC 157, where there's no clinical trial to speak of. You used to have
Yeah.
to do multiple clinical trials to get FDA approval. Now, oftentimes, you only need to do one clinical trial. So I think we've eased up as much as we possibly can. But for there to be no clinical trials, I just think that we're
No,
rapidly.
yeah, no clinical trials is absurd. Now, how long does it take from start to finish to get through the FDA approval process?
Well, every drug's different. Sometimes it's pretty quick, 3 years,
Okay,
4 years. Sometimes it's 15 or 20 years.
okay, that's cool. Yeah, I'm with it.
Okay, I think I'm going to go to another caller.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, appreciate.
Thank you for coming, dude. Um, what's up, John? What's up, Mo?
Hey, Matt.
Hello.
What up?
Would you want John? Do you want to go first? I don't really care.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I'll just start by yielding like I don't know anything about any of this. I'm not an expert, and I've been on a few of these spaces with Martin before. I find his arguments completely compelling. The way I understand it, we've seen some things that involve peptides that are successful, but as something to focus on, they don't make sense because if anything, they're more likely not to work. But my biggest question that's been in my mind this whole time is, Martin, you mentioned like an hour ago or something that a lot of smart people, very intelligent people, are excited about peptides. And my question is just, in this time we're in right now, where there is maybe some impetus to be excited about technological developments, maybe in medicine or pharma, like where would you want that excitement to go? Is there a more productive avenue for these people that are excited about peptides right now in
Yeah,
medicine, or should they just focus on something
that's
else?
a really good question. Medicine is a weird thing because it moves really slowly. There's about 40 drugs approved every year. We all have medical issues. I sometimes have asthma. I have panic disorder. There hasn't been a new drug for panic disorder in 25 years. um, there probably will never be a new drug for panic disorder in my lifetime. Why? Well, biology's hard. It's not that easy. It's not a computer program. We don't really know what causes panic disorder. All psychiatric disorders are a meta disorder because we don't know how the brain works. We don't know how the mind works. We know a little bit about how the brain works, but we don't know how the brain gives rise to the mind. And diseases of the mind are really abstract. So that's why we don't have too many new drugs for depression or other psychiatric illnesses, and we need them pretty bad. So when we think about medicine, we want new things because we're seeing new things with AI or self-driving cars or all kinds of fancy new technology. But why not medicine? Well, we get it in drips and drabs. Like I said, the overall survival for pancreatic cancer is about to double. And when I started in medicine, metastatic breast cancer was around a 6-month overall survival. Now it's around 18 months. That's a lot of progress. It'd be great if it was just cured. And in some diseases, that is what's happening. Like CML used to be a death sentence, and now it's very treatable. Multiple myeloma goes in that bucket now. That used to be really fatal. And there's so many drugs now that make that disease, livable. So sometimes it moves really quickly. I met with a young man who had T-cell ALL, and he's in the investment world, and he said, I'm really thankful for Amgen because they saved my life. I'd be dead without this drug. That guy understands the value of medicine. Somebody who's suffered with like some persistent cough or back pain for a long time, that kind of person's annoyed that there's no treatment for them. And they don't know that there's some amazing treatment for somebody else. Or if they know, they don't care. So they're frustrated at pharma, they're frustrated at science, they're frustrated at drugs. Maybe there's some secret cure somewhere that nobody knows about, and I'll find it. That's the thinking, I think. And I think that tech people tend to, especially to want to gravitate towards like, the boomers in medicine, they aren't doing things the way we are doing them. We move fast and break things. I run a software company now. So I like to move fast and break things too. I took one of our newest guys took prod down for 5 minutes today. It was pretty frustrating. But taking prod down isn't so bad. Making a false claim about a medicine, that's not good. And we want to avoid things like that. And I think that thorough testing is the only way. Imagine giving some of these really sick patients who I mentioned a fake drug. How would you feel? I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. That'd be the worst possible thing for society. What if it was your son who was dying of T-cell ALL, and somebody said unscrupulously, my peptide works. You should buy it for thousands of dollars. It'll treat your T-cell ALL. Is that person going to go to the patient's funeral? That person doesn't care. Everyone who's hawking these peptides just wants to make money. And, all this sort of like invested opposition to what I'm saying is sort of mostly from people who, like, I just saw some tweets that look like they're astroturfed or like bots of like, peptides help me so much, buy them here. It's like, this is disgusting, and if you can't see that, and Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro who went to prison, who is one of the most hated men in America, can see it, and you can't see it. You have to look in the mirror and ask yourself, what to take drugs that aren't proven to work? Why do I want other people to take them? Who's trying to get me to take them? Who's pushing me to take medicine that I don't need? How fucking crazy is that? And smart people sometimes do dumb things. Steve Jobs was one of the smartest people ever. But when he got sick, he didn't trust pharmaceuticals. He didn't trust Art Levinson, the founder, not the founder, but this longtime CEO of Genentech, who was on his board of directors and was a close friend. There are not too many people in the world I would trust for cancer advice than Art Levinson. Too many more people than that. I mean, he's single-handedly invented several cancer drugs. But Steve wanted to do it his own way. And a lot of people want to do things their own way, and I respect that. But again, why LARP? At the end of the day, if you had to do surgery, you wouldn't do it your own way. If you had to go to court, you probably wouldn't represent yourself. If you had to fix, I don't know, your car, I know I wouldn't try. I would take it to a mechanic. Same thing with a plumber. At some point, you have to throw your hands up and say, I don't know what I don't know. And the bigger the stakes, the more you want to do it. The more you don't want to do it yourself. So basically, we're saying, well, what are the stakes? I go to the gym and I don't get bigger? Big deal. But when it comes to real medicine, I know that everybody here, would not trust some random peptide. They'd go to a physician and do it the trad way. But I think people want to just break down regulatory barriers. And this is just a regulatory barrier that's there for a good reason. Because what we had before that was really bad. And what we're trying to build now is shades of that really bad era of medicine, where people would get birth defects. People would get, cancers from some of these drugs because they weren't tested. And it's not good to have a drug that doesn't work, that people are paying for and hoping that it does work. I think that's terrible. That's the term snake oil. We can't go back to that. When you take a drug that's FDA approved, the doctor prescribing it, and you believe it works, and you have proof that it works. Will it work for every single person that takes it? No. But you can rest assured that thousands of people were administered this drug in studies that proved that it worked. And that's the best that you can do. To get away from the standard is insane. And again, I question who wants this? Who wants to hurt society? Who wants to stop rational behavior? Who wants to do this? Of course, it's people who want to do it for their profits. They don't care. And again, if you need me, somebody who's considered one of the most unscrupulous characters in the history of mankind, somebody who's hated, you need me to tell you this is unethical. I feel like I'm crazy. That everybody's crazy. Like, how could this be so obvious to me, but hard for other people to understand? I think that medicine is just something that, we've tended to hate pharma in general over decades. It's something where we take it for granted. Those inventions by scientists are, we're entitled to them. And so much to the point where, well, let's just do it ourselves. So it's a little hard for me to understand sometimes myself.
Hey, Martin, can I speak now?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, this is Mel. So I think the conversation, right, is really about because peptides. I understand where you're coming from with that, but when it comes to the idea of this infallible gatekeeper with the FDA, right? I think what happened is that when COVID hit and you had this reaction of, hey, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, then go get the vaccine, maybe don't get the vaccine. And me personally, I've had a friend who was like 40 years old drop dead after getting like, his fifth booster or something like that. I don't know what it was because of, but he was relatively healthy and dropped it at 40. So when you see these types of things happening in your life and people around you, falling because maybe some bad decisions were made, you start to question everything, right? I think that's what you're really dealing with. And just so you know, like the All In podcast, which is something I listen to almost religiously, those guys talk about peptides in a very positive way. So you and they're obviously tech venture capitalists. So I think what you're seeing now is like, hey, do we need this infallible gatekeeper at the FDA? And they've been wrong a few times before. They've had to pull back drugs that were approved, right? So I think we're just getting to a place where it's like, did we ever sign up to say that I'm going to give up agency to a third party to say I should put something in my body? And I'm not saying like you should go and put anything in your body, right? That's not my position. But I think that society feels constrained by everything that happened, and they saw a lot of weird things play out in 2020, 2021 up until now. And I think human psychology has shifted in some way, sociology has shifted in some way to where you don't believe anybody or anything. And I think what you're talking about when you call it ethical or unethical, I think there's a lot of people who are just like, I don't trust you anymore. And not you, but just the system in general. So I think maybe, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I think there's a general feeling of like, why should I trust in a system when so many things broke in the last few years? And maybe I am going to go and get BPC 157 for my shoulder, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
that's what you're dealing with.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that the answer, though, is to repair damage, not to, you know, throw away the system. It's kind of like saying, well, there's some dirty cops or police, screwed up and shot somebody. Let's dismantle police. I think that the COVID-19 was a global emergency, and governments did the best they could with limited information. In hindsight, some of these decisions were stupid. Some of them may even have been, kind of influenced by politics and or finance. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback on you. If you, thank you, sir. So I think you're right in largely, most of what you said. I mean, I think that when you talk about the gatekeeper, the all-knowing gatekeeper, that's not, I take exception to that, one, and then two, when you said that, giving up agency, I take exception to that as well. We did live in a world before the FDA. It was not great for medicine. It was a terrible time for medicine. The FDA stopped thalidomide from getting FDA approved. Thalidomide was approved in Europe where there was no FDA. It was the Wild West. A German company made thalidomide, and it caused birth defects in thousands of people. If you want to have a really bad day and see images you would rather not see, you can Google thalidomide side effects and see the birth defects of these patients that are horrific. So regulation has a place. I think that we can't let stuff like that happen. It's so horrible that we have to do toxicology studies and research on molecules. When we get the first peptide cancers, peptide-derived cancers and things like that, it's not going to be great, and it's going to call for huge amounts of regulation again. How could you have given my child, a birth defect? I was taking an unregulated peptide. How could you have given my brother cancer? Well, he heard on Reddit that this was a good drug. This is the kind of stuff that the FDA is very conservative on. I once tried to get a drug into humans with 7 days of mouse data. It was for the pecan disease that I mentioned earlier, which is a horrible childhood fatal illness. The FDA demanded 28 days of mouse data. I said 7 days is enough. They said, no, it's not. I said, what the fuck? This kid's dying. They want to take the drug. they said, sorry, our mind is made up, you need 28 days. And it was an arbitrary, stupid decision, but we followed it and it was what it was. I think it meant nothing, but I don't think that it's some all-knowing thing. I think it's society has decided collectively that we should have an FDA. If there are going to be senators and congresspeople that run on abolishing the FDA, I think we have all stepped in the wrong direction. But when that happens, if that ever happens, then, we'll have decided as a society that that's what we want. Government is us. It's people like you and me. We can be congressmen, we can be president, but we have to make good decisions, and we have to think about everybody. And we can't let somebody take a drug that might give them a birth defect, or take a drug that might give their loved one cancer. Think of the person you love the most. I think of my brother, but I also think of my partner and my son. I don't want them to take a peptide that could give them cancer. I want that to be studied thoroughly. And if they wanted to do it, I'd caution them and say, I love you too much. We built a family. I love my brother. I don't want to say goodbye to you because you decided that you wanted to, try something for quote unquote optimization. How insane is that? Again, I think I'm like speaking Greek or something when I hear people who want to take a drug for quote unquote optimization. Why? Why would you take the risk? You don't know what that molecule is going to do to you over time. It's a very strange thing to me to want to throw caution into the wind for what? I don't know. It's something that is strange and just hard to parse. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, then.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
Oh, okay. Sorry about before, but I could speak now.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. I generally agree with your stances on peptides and your criticism of peptide bros, but I did want to talk more about healthcare because I just trust the medicine. Um, yeah, personally, I trust doctors. I trust the FDA. I trust pharmacists. I trust that they'll prevent clinical iatrogenesis. They'll prevent adverse drug effects, infections, surgical complications. I generally trust Western medicine of that. That said, I mean, I do think the medical establishment has become a major threat to health, and specifically because I think it has largely stripped people of the capacity to cope, whether that's with how they look, whether that's with pain or aging, whether that's with just death. Yeah, suffering is suffering has been become a problem that we offshore to professionals, and people have pretty much lost all the cultural ability to cope. Um, so yeah, and I think this is largely because of the medical guild, more like a cartel, that has not just monopolized the treatments, but monopolizes the competence to perform them, and has de-skilled the majority of society. I'm not saying everyone should do surgery on themselves because no one society's never been that way, but there's been a massive de-skilling of a lot of rudimentary medical knowledge. It's a very serious problem, and I think it's largely because medicine has been gatekept. Medical boards have been gatekept. The entire system, and there's no one really. There's really no institutional actor who will reform it. As you said, no one's interest is for fewer diagnoses. Payers may have some incentive, but they're just going to fight on the price. They don't really, I'm not really going to start defining drugs or the medical procedure that's needed. Yeah, I mean the professional societies, the device makers, the pharma companies, the hospital systems.
I don't want to interrupt your monologue, but I'm just trying to understand. I'm a drug guy. I don't really know much about or speak much about the rest of healthcare. That's part of my value is I can go really deep on this one thing. So is there anything about pharmaceuticals you wanted to talk about?
Oh no, I was just gonna say why I believe peptide bros exist because we're kind of going around that issue.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah, I think that there are many reasons why peptide bros exist, and I think you touched on a bunch of them. And then I also think that this general distrust. I don't know if you were around when I was talking about apophenia, but the things that we can't know in the world, like whether there'll be a drug developed for my disease or whether there's a drug at all that does something like this. The apophenia victims want to believe that there is an answer. It's just hidden somewhere and you're special to find it. This phenomenon of apophenia occurs in societies where trust has been destroyed. There are many studies. I was going to write a big essay on this, but I lost the beat of it. But there are many times when the ability for people to believe experts gets strained, and it goes up and down like a stock. And right now, nobody is believing any experts, and we have no trust for authority at all. And in the 70s or 80s, I think we had the highest trust of authority. In the 60s, it was quite low. And it kind of ebbs and flows. And right now, trust for authority is really low. And it's gotten so bad that we don't know what to believe from the media. You've got people that have been so far over into the right wing, and we all know these kinds of people. You know, nothing wrong with being conservative. I am myself. But they've gotten so far into that world that they're, you know, almost insane. And the same thing sort of happened with medicine. The same thing's happening with other fields. And, you know, you could see it across society. And part of it is, yeah, we're learning that some of the things that were told to us were lies. You know, I, for instance, don't have a really good trust of the legal system. After the president was arrested, I think other people had lost some trust in the legal system as well. Some people maybe gained. COVID-19, I think both sides kind of lost trust. Every American lost trust. American lost trust in the media. The Senate, who I had somewhat famous fight with, you know, one of the things that I had prepared to say was that while you may say that I'm the most hated man in the world, the institution with the lowest credibility in the world is the United States Senate, Congress. So, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, there's just this deep distrust everywhere. Like, who do we trust, if anything? And, you know, trust for doctors, like doctors were some of the most revered people. And now we've seen doctors become pill mills. We've seen doctors do Medicaid fraud. You know, we're losing that faith and trust. So, you know, we're living in this world laid bare that, you know, we can't trust anybody. And it's sowing division. It's creating chaos. Social media is a cesspool as well. So I don't know if that's what society looks like. But in some ways I can't, you know, really talk too much about it. You know, my expertise isn't that. It's not sociology. All I can say is that I'm observing things have gotten so far away from reality that we basically, you know, we're in a useless place. If we start to forget about FDA and start to forego clinical trials and forego just even toxicology. These are the kinds of things that are really dangerous. One interesting compromise would be kind of interesting for the really libertarian. I'm a libertarian. The super libertarians of us that want to be able to try whatever we want. You know, kind of a happy medium would be to do toxicology. Toxicology is this rigorous program of testing whether really high doses cause any effects in two species. The key to toxicology is histopathology, which is the dissection of about 20 different organs from the euthanized animal. Toxicology is very valuable. You can feel a lot better about taking a drug if it's been through a toxicology battery, including a carcinogenicity study, which is a 2-year study that costs millions of dollars. The whole toxicology battery can be done for about 15 million, I would guess. Take about 2 or 3 years. FDA approval, you know, maybe you get it in 3 to 4 years. And then you can take all the drugs you want. I'd be okay with that. As a libertarian that doesn't like regulation, you know, there would be a lot of problems with that in that we'd still have snake oil. And people would charge for drugs that don't do anything for people who are really sick. That'd be terrible. But at least it wouldn't cause, you know, some random untoward effect. If one person gets cancer or dies from a unregulated peptide, I think that's, you know, kind of an avoidable tragedy. I fear that it's not going to be one person, that we're going to relive the thalidomide crisis. You know, these crises tend to repeat themselves when people forget the lessons of them. The last crisis like this was thalidomide. And it's been 80 years since thalidomide, roughly. I think we're going to see another thalidomide if we keep going in this direction, and we'll be back to the way things were right after thalidomide, which is the United States patients saying, thank God for the FDA, and the European people who were very libertarian at the time, had no regulations around this stuff, said, we need to get our act together and get a regulatory, effort immediately, because this disaster is a human, this is like a human tragedy that 10,000 people have birth defects because we didn't step in and make people do a simple test. That's a real tragedy, and it's going to happen. At this rate, there's no doubt it's going to happen. It's just a question of when and how bad does it get. And it may be happening right now and we don't see it yet. And to me, that's like the worst risk-reward profile ever. I'm not sick. I read something on Reddit that might help with my back pain or shoulder pain, and now I'm dead. That doesn't make sense. You go to your doctor and the doctor says, there's not much I can do for you. That doesn't mean try harder. Somebody says, I need to replace your toilet, or you need to replace this pipe. Your toilet won't work without this pipe, or your carburetor, or whatever. And you say, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I had a friend who was very sick who did this. He can't walk. He has osteogenesis imperfecta, a terrible bone disease. And he basically said he tried this. He said, I'm just going to take a bunch of testosterone and I'm going to work out and I think I'll be able to walk. And he tried this and failed. His condition got worse. We can't just, will our way to some of these things as much as we'd like to. Think about a patient with Duchenne muscular dystrophy who's dying, a family that the whole family has got the disease in some ways. You would do anything for your child, but you also probably not going to scour the world looking for something that doesn't work and then try to force your child to take it. I think most of the DMD families and patients I know, they're desperate. They want to try something, but they're also not ready to try something that doesn't work or try something that has no chance of working. They don't want to make their child's disease worse because they have no reason to believe that it's going to make it better. Why not just wait for a clinical trial or some other professional setting? I think that's very reasonable, and that's what most families, thank God, do. But, maybe there is one or two people that say, you know what, I'm going to try for the Hail Mary. I'm going to see if I could cure my own kid. It's delusional. It's like trying to make your own rocket or something. It's just better off if we have a society that looks the way it looks now. And creeping away from this, I think, is just going to cause disaster. And, I don't know. Not all regulations are horrible. I think as somebody who hates government and has had a fight with almost every single 3-letter or 4-letter agency of the United States government, some historical arguments and fights, I still think that there's regulatory bodies that work and that are fine. Let's hear from maybe somebody new. Crypto Charades?
Yeah, so I just had a quick question. Would you differentiate from, say, like the 80+ FDA-approved peptides, things like insulin, tesamorelin, and all those, compare those to the new ones, like the BPC-157 that are kind of, we got rat trials and mouse trials and Russian trials, but nothing really properly RCT'd here in the U.S. Do you differentiate between those two kind of when you're talking peptides?
Yeah, of course. I guess you weren't here earlier, but I was talking about, what is a peptide and,
Right.
So forth. And yeah, peptides are, we make peptides naturally, thousands of them. And some of them can be used medicinally. And there's synthetic and custom peptides. And those are all pharmaceuticals, The non-pharmaceutical peptides that are just kind of random experiments done by, if you read the BPC story, it's incredible. It's a Croatian or Serbian guy, I forget which, Yugoslavian guy. And it's just all a scam. He's the only guy who publishes on BPC 157, and he's published for 30 years the same bullshit. And it's very obvious to anyone in pharma that this is not a drug. It's the saddest, furthest, excuse of a drug I can find, really. But for whatever reason, it went viral. And, there are other peptides that are not FDA approved that are available and probably do work. Retatrutide is a funny example of a drug that is available even though it's not FDA approved yet, because it is so exciting as a weight loss medicine that it's already been pirated and you can get it before even a doctor can prescribe it. So it's like this early access, basically what in any other industry you would call piracy, or hacking. And you can whip up the molecule on the side yourself and, get it from somebody who can do that. And now you take the drug even before the FDA approves it, which should be theoretically the first ever possible access to the medicine. So, because Eli Lilly has patent filings and things like that, you can read the patent and go pirate it. You're infringing on Lilly's patent, but who gives a fuck? So I think, of course, those are medicines made professionally and carefully under CGMP conditions that have gone through clinical trials, but so are antibodies and small molecules and gene therapy and every other kind of medicine. Peptides are just one modality, but there's nothing special about them. They're in fact, like I said, one of the weaker ways to make a drug, given their usually very short half-life and other metabolic problems. You can't give an oral peptide, for example, typically at least. There's always exceptions. But typically peptides are destroyed in the gut with peptidases and proteases. So in any event, yeah, of course these are different things. And a lot of the times people who are talking about quote-unquote peptides, they're not even peptidic. I use the word peptides like how most people use it, which is just a catch-all for any research chemical that they're getting, off the internet somewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the question for me is it just a question of whether they're approved or not? Because yeah, there's no RCTs on the 8 that were discussed in the last 2 days here. But I mean, if we ran RCTs on those and they popped up, maybe not all of them, but 2 or 3 of them showed up and said, "Oh, these actually do something. There's a there." Let's put those in the market with the proper, guardrails. Are you you pro that, or are you just saying like, "Oh, this peptide thing is ridiculous"?
That's called pharmaceuticals, right? That's what you described is called the current pharmaceutical regulatory system, which is what makes sense, right? I don't know how a mouse study if a mouse study could get you excited about a drug. I got a whole lot of mouse studies that didn't work out in the long run. I can show you. Like I said, I started the conversation talking about my drug for pecan that my chief medical officer, that I invented this drug, my chief medical officer thought for sure worked. And I thought for sure it didn't, and I was right. The clinical trial proved it didn't work. And that was human evidence. He saw it with his own eyes. These people were getting better, according to him. I didn't believe it. I want to see the real trial. The real trial showed it failed. And to give that drug to pecan patients and pretend that it worked and sell it to them as a potential treatment, that would have been a disgrace. That's what a clinical trial is for. Give it to 50 people, give a placebo to the other 50 people, give it 6 months and see what happens. Everyone can wait 6 months. For the good of everyone in the long run, we have to wait 6 months and see. And it's kind of greedy, not financially, but ethically, to say, you know what, I want to do a study. I want the drug now. Well, are you dying? No, I have back pain. Well, maybe somebody should do the trial and do it in a sophisticated way, and then we'll decide if it works, and somebody has to pay the money to do this. So when I challenge these peptide companies that want to sell the stuff now as if it works, well, why don't you do the trial and prove it? Why are you so greedy that you want to sell it before knowing whether it does anything or not? And look,
Isn't it a chicken and the egg thing, though? Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Isn't it a chicken and the egg thing, though? Because you've got these companies that want to do these peptides, but there's nothing protectable there, so they're not going to put up the millions of dollars it takes to do RCTs.
Well, you get 5 years of protection. You get 5 years of new chemical exclusivity, it's called. You can often just ask the GLP companies, make very small tweaks to these molecules, and you have substantially the same drug, but a new patent. That's, in fact, many of these quote-unquote drugs like BPC 157 could use an adjustment or two, given their terrible properties. So it's not too hard to be a drug company, but it's a lot easier to sell this stuff mail order. And, again, I question the incentive. Like, how did this quote-unquote industry spring up all of a sudden? Why are we being shoved this stuff in our face? Who's behind this? Who stands to benefit? I don't think it's the patients. I think it's the people, who just want to flood the world with these molecules and make a quick buck, and there are people gullible enough to believe it. Drug companies aren't perfect. But there is a pretty big industry of people like me and Vivek Ramaswamy and others that scour the world for new inventions. I mean, literally crisscross the world's universities and drug companies and other things looking for promising medicine. Of course, there's stuff we miss. And there's stuff that are legitimate treatments or even cures that sit on the shelf somewhere at some university for years. And that's what BPC is. It was a drug that is in some Serbian, Yugoslavian, again, I forget if it's Croatia or Serbia, university that some guy works at, and it's his pet little product. I've got 10 pet little drugs I've made. And maybe one of two of them could actually be great treatments. But every chemist, every biologist has this. There's millions of these things. We all have a pet treatment or thought that, I think I could cure, pick some random disease. Leishmanian disease, which is a crazy illness, if you want to read about it. I think I could treat Leishmanian disease with a certain nucleotide. It's a really crazy idea. But I'm not about to go out there and say it works, publish a bunch of rat data, and pretend that it's real, probably manipulate the data. Even I, supposedly this terrible, unethical person, even I find that so distasteful and disgusting. I would never do that. And I have never done something like that in my career in medicine. It's just too beyond the pale. Now, could I with a straight face say, well, look, my rat study shows it works, why not try it? Yeah, I can make that argument, but it doesn't sit well. It's just so much better to go through the test of capitalism and say, well, if this is a good idea, go raise some money. Go see what RA Capital says. Go see what OrbiMed says. Go see what Pfizer says. They all turn you down and say you're retarded. Well, maybe you're retarded. And if you can't convince somebody to go write the check to do the study, NIH, who writes huge checks, anybody, well, you're shit out of luck, and you're back in the, you're sort of back in the line, because the best ideas win. The best ideas get funded. And just like, if you said that you wanted to build some rocket and all the rocket investors looked at it and said, this thing sucks, you can't cry and go to fraud. You gotta retool your pitch, make some improvements, do something. The fraud would be to doctor the records of the rocket, or to sell the medicine as if it worked anyway. That's the wrong approach. The right approach is let the best medicines win. We all fight for funding. The VC funds and hedge funds and so forth, they only have so much money. They're not going to be able to fund everyone that wants money. They say no most of the time because they want a good return. They only want to invest in the best stuff. And yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some stuff that gets passed on that would have worked. But, if you can't get the funding for your study, then, it probably isn't one of the better medicines. And, to try to shortcut it and sell it anyway, I mean, it's just crazy. So, any other
Hey,
thoughts?
Martin,
Hey,
sorry to jump in
what's
here.
up,
Yes, a
Simon?
long-time listener, first-time caller, huge fan. So basically, what are your thoughts on like GLP-1, for example? Because you guys talked about optimizations when it comes to, hey, this is not that serious or this is not life, threatening. But if you look at, for example, like GLP-1, which in itself I think has been the driver of popularizing peptides, at least with the normies, isn't it technically life-saving if people are having outcomes
Yeah, it's
where
great.
their weight is decreasing, they're more functional? Don't you think that could be the same case could be made for something in terms of cognitive decline, etc.?
No, there's a disease. There are many cognitive decline diseases that we can do clinical trials for. Many have tried, and unfortunately, there are just not many drugs for cognitive impairment. It would be a great day if somebody could make a drug for Alzheimer's, which is the main driver of cognitive impairment, or senility.
And do you not and do you not believe that's going to start with someone with who's probably might not have access to funding? I mean, so much of this is like it takes what, like
Probably not.
$1-2 billion.
I mean, you look at cancer. Who has made a cancer drug other than drug companies? Nobody.
Well, as you yourself know, and myself, I don't work in this industry, I work in tech, but there are some powerful people out there where there are financial incentives to artificially raise the barrier to entry to prevent incumbents.
I don't think so. I mean, anybody can make
drugs in Russia.
anybody can make a drug. I mean, the small company called Revolution Medicines made their own cancer treatment and outfoxed Pfizer, Merck, Lilly, everybody. There's thousands of drug companies, so nobody can raise barriers to every drug company, and they're very competitive. So oncology is a space where there's some drug companies that just don't play in it, and they would love to. So a company like Sanofi that basically has nothing in oncology, they would love to make a new cancer drug. They don't care about Merck's monopoly or Pfizer's cancer division or any other cancer company. They're out for themselves. So Sanofi would be very happy to go create a disaster for Merck by making a better PD-1 inhibitor. I mean, that's what happens every day. That's how the capitalist system creates great medicines. Roche, was the cancer leader for the longest time, and Merck outfoxed them. Merck didn't give a shit about Roche losing some revenue. Merck has to look out for Merck. So I think, it is expensive to make a drug, but that's because it's high tech. It's just like AI or something. I mean, you can't make a new memory or chip without $1 billion fab or $10 billion fab or even $100 billion fab. Well, you shouldn't be upset that you can't make a drug for less than $1 billion. Drugs are more important than fabs, I'd say. And you can make a drug for 50 million, but you can't make a drug for 0 million. It's not software, unfortunately. But, software is getting better, and you can start the process of designing drugs for very little. And chemistry and some preclinical experiments can be done for less than $1 million. And if you can't convince an investor to pay the next 5 million, well, your idea wasn't that good. And, that's the breaks. And maybe somebody will have the same exact idea 5 years later and get funded. It's happened to me. I've seen it 1 million times, and it'll happen again. And that's just something that is part of luck. And, medicine is just one of these things that I think is too important to throw caution to the wind and just try it. Now, again, cancer, so competitive. Everybody wants to make the next new cancer drug. But Revolution found a way, and now they're basically a big pharma. They're worth 40, 50 billion. They're halfway to being defined as a big pharma. So this one company with one drug, all of a sudden, it's so good that they're practically as big as a big pharma company. In fact, there was a Wall Street Journal article the other day that said big pharma can't acquire Revolution because it's too big. It'd basically be like a merger. And what a great thing to be Revolution, right? But there's only one Revolution, and there's thousands of wannabes and pretenders. And, nevertheless, they were able to come up with a new huge advance for cancer, and that's a wonderful thing. And it's not going to come from the average Joe. Now, could some person take a molecule and say, gee, my mother stopped having her cognitive decline after I gave her this oatmeal or something, and they find some, special molecule in the oatmeal? Yeah, that stuff does happen. I mean, the drug fingolimod, S1P inhibitor or S1P agonist actually from Novartis, it was found in a Japanese moss that had remarkable autoimmune properties. All these things happen, but more likely than not, it's scientists looking at crystal structures, doing biology, things like that. That's usually how medicine is made. You definitely get the occasional serendipity. I mean, like I said, ketamine in depression was a really good example, and I chased that as hard as anybody, fighting Johnson & Johnson to the finish line. So serendipity counts, nothing wrong with serendipity, but you have to be clear-eyed about it. Probably we're going to get the first, senility or Alzheimer's drugs or cognitive impairment drugs from studying the brain more, but it could be serendipity too. And then there's engineered serendipity, which is my favorite, which is, there's actually a way to do a sort of medium throughput mouse study where you get thousands of mice, put them in cages, somehow induce cognitive impairment, give them 1,000 different drugs, and see, using AI and computer vision, which mice get better, and then go with that drug and start to move on. So there are ways to back into innovation without, we don't know how the brain works. We're never going to figure it out that way. So we try a different way. Let's try combinatorically. One of these molecules must work. If we have a high fidelity animal model, a lot of animal models aren't high fidelity. One of the funniest animal models is a Pourceau swimming test where you chuck the rat in some water. You just chuck the rat in a tub of water and count.
That's scientific.
Yeah, and you count how much time it takes for the rat to give up on swimming. which basically, the rat decides life isn't worth fighting for. And the depression, it's an analog for depression. A depressed rat says, I'm not going to try that hard. I'm going to swim for 30 seconds and that's it. After that, I'm done.
Yeah.
Whereas the non-depressed rat, can swim for a minute before he gives up. And this is how drugs like Prozac were tested. There's other tests for depression in animals, but we don't have high fidelity for cognition. Maze running time is kind of one of them. But again, I think you could do this in a really high throughput way. I mean, nobody's ever done a 10,000 mouse experiment, but why not? We can get 10,000 mice. So I think that, there are ways to be creative about this stuff, and scientists, it is a creative endeavor, and, it could come from anywhere.
And to and on that point, just sorry to interject, but and what are your thoughts on like Russian developed peptides? For example, you have like Cmax, Selank, you have, pick a million, hundreds of these different ones where in the
Yeah.
US there are regulatory things that, stood in the way. But ultimately, I mean, do they not have are their clinical trials not weighed the same or
Yeah, they're not. Unfortunately, at least in America, Russia has a bad reputation for medicine. They tends to be, for whatever reason, these drugs fail to replicate. A really good example was a drug called Dimebon, which was an antihistamine developed in Russia. It was developed and discovered to be a potent anti-Alzheimer's drug. And Dimebon phase 2 trial was published in Lancet, famous medical journal. It was the best clinical trial you've ever seen for Alzheimer's. There is no way that this drug would fail a phase 3. The phase 2 was so compelling. Every patient got better on the drug. None of the placebo patients got better. They declined. Miracle, right? Pfizer paid a lot of money to get this drug. So did an American company. Well, they ran 2 big phase 3 trials and the drug doesn't work. How could that happen? Well, to this day, it's a bit of a mystery, but it's pretty clear that data was fabricated. So Russia's sort of had a tough time, doing an international global clinical trial, is not something that is regional to a country. There are American companies doing global clinical trials. There are European ones. There's a big Australian pharma called CSL. There's big Japanese pharmas. And there's no big Russian pharma. And why is a good question. But, there's not, like India, for example, is just starting doing non-generic drugs and developing its own medicines. And it's doing all right. But for whatever reason, Russia has just sort of been behind on advanced medicine. They do some generics. They do some other development. I actually have a friend who's Nikolai, who's probably one of the best known pharma entrepreneurs in Russia. He's very smart and very sophisticated, but he, there are not many Nikolais, but there's thousands of drug entrepreneurs in America and China and whatever. So I think, the peptide stuff, I mean, Nikolai doesn't even traffic in that stuff. Like, he does real Russian, science for small molecules for HIV. He had some impressive stuff there, large molecules. So I think the peptide thing is just kind of this cheap hack that a lot of people want to circumvent, like, all of this stuff and have some miracle that, springs out of nowhere. Drug discovery is actually just really hard work, just like software or anything else. You got to bust your ass and make it perfect.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Thanks for sharing. I
No.
think the last I think to put a bow on it, the last thing I'm getting at is, do you not think that with certain maybe drugs, I think you've spoken about this before, but like the ongoing treatment is obviously more lucrative or yields a higher return rather than one-off cures. And I think that for that reason, you have some countries where at least ethically speaking, they have been more consistent in trying to cure their populations because, for example, the health outcomes are going to directly contribute to like higher tax expenditure because the healthcare is subsidized more directly through taxes. Whereas in the U.S., because it's a more privatized system, do you not believe that that has any influence on the regulators on these companies?
No, I don't. There's two or three reasons. The first is it's not necessarily true that it's more profitable because you you can charge a lot of money for a one-time cure, and many companies do exactly that. When the first HIV treatment, I'm sorry, the first hepatitis C treatment came out, it had a sticker shocker of a price. In fact, I used that price to pick the price for my very own medicine that caused a lot of controversy. Hep C used to have this terrible treatment that didn't work, and it was expensive. But they made the first Hep C pills, and they worked beautifully. But the price was $80,000, and people said, "What the hell? This is so expensive." And the company
It's so
was
tough.
the company was sort of like, "Well, imagine it's like $8,000 a year for 10 years. It's the same thing, right?" And instead, you only have to take our drug once, so we want to get paid. And Gilead sold tens of billions of dollars of this medicine. It was one of the best-selling medicines of all time, even though you just take it once and that's it. The reason that you can't cure most of the time is because if you think about it, let's take allergies. I take Claritin. Many people here probably do too. Something's going wrong with your histaminergic system. You're making too much histamine. The histamine is binding the histamine 1 receptor and the histamine 2 receptor. As it's doing that, your nose is running. You feel awful. You're itching. Allergies suck. Then you take Claritin. Claritin swims in and says, "No, histamine, you will not be binding the histamine receptor because I'm going to stand in between you and the histamine receptor like a bouncer, and you will not be able to activate the histamine receptor, and therefore the allergies will go away." And it's wonderful. It's not a perfect drug, by the way. Some histamine still works, but it works. Now, what happens when you stop taking the drug? Well, you're not being cured. Well, why not? Well, the bouncer goes away. There's no more bouncer to stand between the histamine and the receptor. So the histamine happily activates it again. So how do you cure this? Well, you could try to figure out what's causing the histamine increase. But unfortunately, nothing is that easy. Everything sort of is happening for some reason, and it's hard to tease apart, but you can stop it. And for people suffering from the allergies, if you try to take their Claritin away, they say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 I still need that." And you might say, "Well, I need you to have a cure, not just a treatment." And you say, "Well, I'll take the treatment until you give me the cure." Allergies are something where you might have an environmental allergen or something like that. It's hard to necessarily just see what's going on. And the best part about medicine is that when a drug goes generic, it's available for pennies by anybody. So Claritin is generic. You can go to your drugstore and get a whole big bottle, I think on Amazon. I think I got one for $20. I got 100 pills. It's amazing. It's pennies per pill. So, of course I'd rather cure my allergies, but the next best thing is taking this drug. And if the drug could stay in my system forever, I kind of would like that in a way because I wouldn't have to keep taking the medicine. And there are many drugs now where the treatment time is being extended and extended and extended using technology where, there's a cholesterol drug that now you can take, I think, once a quarter. And there's an osteoporosis drug you could take once or twice a year. Well, that's pretty convenient. The drug stays in your system and the physiological effect continues for a while. And then there's even CRISPR type drugs where there's a one-time treatment where it'll edit your DNA and that's that. And that's coming in the next, decade or so. And so I think that the drug industry is very happy to sell one-time treatments. It's just that they're hard to do because thinking about that allergy thing or even a cancer thing, well, mutated proteins going haywire, you got to make sure that drug is blocking that mutated protein 24/7. You can't skip a dose or that mutated protein's going to go haywire. Unless you can find a way to edit every DNA of every cell in the human body, there's only one way to do it, which is to give the drug continuously. So sometimes a cure is just practically impossible. It's like editing binary code with your eyes. Pretty tough. You're going to need some hex editor or something to decompile it. So it's just
Yeah.
not practical.
Yeah. I meant more from a perspective of like recurring treatments. If you look economically, right, most people are, employers pay payroll like on a gradual basis. So like most people, like for example, you see this with the stock market, right? People get paid and their 401ks and everything kind of contributes. I thought in terms of, economic feasibility, if you look at, not a lot of people have $80,000 today. Most insurers might not cover it.
Yeah,
And
no, they
if
do.
you
They
make your
they
treatment
definitely cover it. Somebody's paying.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, like it depends, right? If it's as you mentioned, if it's like life altering, life saving versus, cosmetic or whatever. But I guess my point is like, within a company, like again, like from software and most of my use cases, like we much rather get paid monthly or annual contract over a long period of time rather than almost any amount of money today, unless it's like millions, you know?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think the drug companies don't. You can't really design medicine that way. You either your technology either kind of works one way or another. Like the funniest part of it all is that you only get 10 years to sell this stuff anyway. Because the patent expires and you're cooked and you got to do it again.
Interesting.
So
That's a good point.
you kind of don't really care that much. All you really are looking for is a drug that works, which is hard enough as it is to be able to say, well, I want it to be, monthly or one time. Like, we don't have that luxury. Take whatever works and move on. And again, not many drugs, the technology just isn't there to make it one time. The CRISPR new technology is kind of makes sense logically that, okay, that can be a one-time drug. Gene therapy to some extent is one time, although we found that it seems to wear off. But all the other physics of these drugs are, well, once the drug leaves the system, the disease comes right back. So, it has to be a subscription model, as a software person might say. It would be great to have it as a one-time installation that you pay once, but what physics would that match? I mean, you'd have to have like something that permanently disrupts the disease process, which is far easier to go adjust the one protein that you could rescue the phenotype with than to go and try to muck with, like I said, DNA or something like more permanent. Some people are not comfortable with that. In fact, there's a company called Intilia that's making a CRISPR drug for some rare diseases, and some patients actually are saying, and doctors are saying, well, it's actually better if I can control when the patient gets the drug and doesn't, because I can take it out and stop the treatment if there's a side effect. But with a one-time therapy, with changing your genes, there's no going back. You do that, you can't go, I want
Yeah.
to go change them back. So thoughts before I close off? I got to get some rest.
But if I could jump in with a quick question, Martin. Um, so I appreciate the hard work that you do to tell people that there's hard work involved, and I think it's amazing that you get thousands of people to watch you do a spreadsheet analysis of a stock for an hour. I think that's an achievement, man. Um, I just wanted to ask about a couple of drugs that are widely used for a long time: statins and benzos. So
Yes.
my understanding of statins is they're not hugely effective for general population for everybody, but for high risk people that maybe had a heart attack, very
Yeah.
high cholesterol, they're very effective. There's a big effect size.
Yes.
Is that roughly
Yeah, I
correct?
think that's right. And I think this kind of there's confusion like about COVID here too, because one of the hardest things about medicine is finding that effect size. You use the right term. So this is why aging and longevity is doomed to fail, unfortunately. So if you have a drug, for example, that increases lifespan by 10%, that's an amazing achievement. I mean, what an incredible thing, right? I want to live 10% more. I wish my father were still here, for example. 10% more is a lot. That's a lot more memories. That's a lot more love. That's a lot more great things. That's the most valuable thing we have, time. So you come up with an idea for a drug that increases human lifespan by 10%. Maybe you increase rat lifespan by 10%. You say, all right, let's see if it works in humans. You have to do a trial. Well, your trial has to be powered statistically to detect a 10% difference in lifespan. So that means that you probably have to enroll 10,000 people and monitor them for 20 years, something like that. Because if they are going to die anyway at 88, well, you have to enroll the population first. So you're going to find people who are willing to do the study, take your medicine for 10 years. And I think statistically, by the time you can see the 10% difference between drug and placebo, well, I think it'll take. It's tricky because you have to find people. If you give it to people who are 65, well, you don't know when they're going to die. There's a Kaplan-Meier curve. Some of them will die by 70. more still will be dead by 75, and pretty much everyone will be dead by 100. So you have to have a Kaplan-Meier curve that shows like area under the curve separation with a hazard ratio of 0.9 or better. I think that a study like this is practically impossible. You would need so many patients and have to follow them for so long that even the only way you could do something like this is if the effect size was enormous, like a 30 or 40% improvement in survival. Now, the problem is, of course, there's no one master switch for survival. Some people die of heart disease. Some people die of lung disease. Some people die of no real known cause, natural causes. We don't know. Some people die from cancer. So if you could find one drug that fixes it all, well, you know, it'd be a miracle. I think it's so unlikely. But you still would have to prove it in human beings. And if you mess up your enrollment and let's say you enroll people who are 80, well, you're running the risk that these people are too old to help anyway. Maybe your drug only works in really young people, and they have to take it for a lifetime to get that extra 10%. Well, then you're really fucked, because now you got to start enrolling people who are 20. By the time they die, your company will be long gone, so will you. There's no way to economically incentivize this kind of analysis. So I think, you know, that there's kind of this hard thing about doing these trials where if the effect is small, you might as well not even bother. I mean, if you said I have a 1% improvement in lifespan, well, the statistics mean the sample size goes up the more the effect size goes down. You might need to study 10 million people to see and prove that it wasn't a fluke. So, you know, medicine is just, you know, really tricky. And the best thing we can do is focus on people who are really sick, try to find the biology that makes sense for them. You know, if you have an eye disease, we have to study how the eye works. Eye proteins, crystallize them, test them in vitro and vivo studies. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I kind of got on some fun tangents.
No, yeah, that was great. I want to just bring it back to the benzos.
Oh yeah, benzos.
Yeah,
Yeah. So benzos are lifesavers for. Oh, so you know, just real quick back to statins. So the reason
yeah.
this told the story is that imagine now you have to develop a statin which lowers LDL. So we know the statin lowers LDL. That's, you know, proof positive, right? There's no doubt. The problem is, what does that mean? You know, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Does it matter? Is there a bad way to lower LDL? Is there a good way to lower it? Nobody knows. So of course they tested the drug in the most vulnerable patients, because for all the reasons I just mentioned, statistically, having a big effect size like a 20% reduction in cardiovascular events, well, I need fewer patients. I still need a lot. And I don't need to study them for that long. But if it's a primary prevention, people like you and me that have never had a heart attack, well, odds are you and I are never going to have a heart attack, even though we may have high cholesterol. And if we did a study of people like you and me, I don't know, we might need 1 million patients. And the effect size we would detect is pretty small. It might be like 5%, if that. So primary prevention has always dogged statins because we tend to believe that lower cholesterol is good. We don't really have proof of it. We know that lower cholesterol is good when you've had a stroke or you have comorbid other problems like smoking or other things. I have elevated LDL, but I don't take a statin because my doctors have all uniformly agreed, several different doctors have all said, you know, you don't have the other issues. You're not overweight. You don't have diabetes. You don't smoke. You don't have any other diseases that would encourage us to get your LDL down. Maybe you change your diet, but, you know, they've always said lower is better, but there's no real proof of that. And we have the same problem with vaccines, which is another reason that COVID was so confounding for people. Vaccines are just an epidemiological experiment. You know, there's no disease that's the same every year, like influenza or something. So with cholesterol, when I give 1,000 people a statin and it reduces on average LDL by 35%, a new patient taking the drug should expect 35%. There should be no surprises. Your cholesterol, my cholesterol, your enzyme, my enzyme, they're all the same. But it doesn't work that way with measles or mumps or rubella. These diseases change every year based on possibly the way the vaccine worked the year prior. and other things. So we never had a real study of whether or not diseases like MMR or the MMR vaccine actually worked. The best evidence we had came later, where we saw the incidence of MMR drop dramatically. But we didn't have that evidence in a clinical trial. All we really had was a small study where the people who were inoculated got less MMR, but we didn't know if that would work in millions of people. There's only one way to find out. We tried it. And COVID is sort of the same thing. Like, those vaccines worked really well in a clinical trial at that exact time for that exact strain. When those drugs had to hit the wild, a lot of shit changed. Depending on the way we did other things and depending on how the disease changed, well, maybe the vaccine stopped working. We just don't even know at this point. Even to this day, nobody can say with a straight face whether the COVID vaccine saved millions of lives or saved no lives. We have no clue. We know that we created a lot of immunity, but was that immunity helpful or not? I don't know. Nobody knows. I would guess that it probably saved lives, but I would just be guessing. People still died of COVID. So it's like one of these things where experiments are sometimes like it's a ship in a bottle, like it's one specific thing for one specific time. And then sometimes they're really replicatable and really like clearly, when you take a GLP, you're going to lose weight because you can take that to the bank, the way the trials are run. So in terms of benzos, what a weird and tough medicine. They're like life-saving in some regards and the worst medicine ever invented in others. For people who have severe anxiety, you sort of can't live without benzos. And I know this because it affects me and my family. People who have deep panic disorder, benzos are a lifesaver. The problem, of course, is benzos are abused. They're used, recreationally. Xanax has made it to rappers. Once it makes it to the rappers, you're in trouble. So
It was probably when they put it into sticks.
yeah. Well, the Zans, the bars,
The bars.
this and that, and the problem with benzos seems to be that in the long run they cause cognitive impairment. Although I studied this, like I said, for my family member, and the evidence seems wishy-washy. But the addiction of benzos is substantial. Especially if you're taking them recreationally, but also if you're taking them medicinally. If the benzo is alleviating your anxiety, which can be crippling. My panic disorder is alleviated mostly through SNRI, venlafaxine, but there are people that they can be on 4 or 5 different medicines and their anxiety is still pounding away these terrible panic attacks. And benzos are the only thing that can really abort a serious panic attack. And they're used in other diseases as well, but that's, I think, the primary usage where they're really fantastic. And ultimately, like some of the medicines out there, we just have to take the good with the bad. Pain drugs are the same way. Person who has stage 4 cancer with bone pain, the worst pain you can have in life. But what are you going to do to that patient? Not give them opioids? You'd be crazy. You have to. But doctors increasingly are getting scared about, when do I give morphine? When do I give, fentanyl? These are important medicines, and they should be used carefully, but, they still need to be used. And I think that, you have to balance kind of, what does my patient need? And benzos, sadly, are kind of one of these drugs where, like, that's all we got. Like, you can give lots of other drugs for anxiety and pretend they work or hope they work. You give somebody who's experienced a panic attack a nice dose of Xanax, the panic attack's gone. And unfortunately, that patient's not getting high. They're not feeling great. They're just becoming normal, which to them feels great. But, these drugs start to get into the wrong hands, and people drink with them, and they get addicted, they die, they have withdrawal. Pain drugs are the same. What are you going to do about it? We can't find, especially with some of the CNS, neuroscience, neurology, psychiatry drugs, there's just no way to sort of fine-tune the brain and say, let's extinguish your bad memories. Let's make sure you have this, response to this. It's just hard. And the medicine we have is brute force. We are learning more about the brain, in my opinion, through AI, where when we see how AI works, it's very, very similar to the human brain. And as we adjust things in AI, I predict that we might be able to start to adjust things in the human brain chemically by mimicking how we work with AI. And I think that's a really cool thing. And if you read the scientific literature, you'll see many cases where the two are inspiring each other backwards and forwards. And you're seeing in mice architectures that you never would have guessed show up in the mouse brain that look just like some of the things we see in software. And it's fascinating that you can decipher what's going on in a mouse in their brain and map it almost like a software. So one day maybe we'll be able to understand the brain on that level. When that happens, I will be very happy because I've seen the suffering that anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, OCD, autism, you name it, every psychiatric disorder, bipolar, can have on people. And it's probably the biggest unmet medical need, in my opinion, at this point. Cancer is sort of on its way out thanks to molecular genetics. We're starting to see amazing advances, but psychiatry's stuck in the Stone Age. I mean, we don't have anything new in psychiatry for decades, and the future looks bleak. At least
Yeah.
Martin.
30, 40 years.
And you know
Martin.
what? Can I just hit you with one more quick one? I just actually, family member literally today was on the phone, and alcoholic got him into
Yeah.
basically called an ambulance for him, and GLP-1s for
Yeah, that
alcoholism.
could work. I mean, I think alcoholism and other addictions are really terrible as well. They're psychiatric conditions to some extent. And yeah, I think GLPs certainly do something to our brains. It's a little mysterious because they don't really work on the brain, but there's something there. And the right answer here is to do a trial, and the companies I believe are doing the trials. In fact, I've made a post somewhat recently that Lilly is not just doing trials and say diseases like that, but they're going into really weird illnesses like depression and other things that seem to have nothing to do with GLPs, but they want to see if they work. And I think I applaud Lilly for doing that because Novo never did that. They're going into things like sleep apnea, which of course has some relation given obesity, but even things like, I made this post like Crohn's disease, psoriasis, like stuff that is clearly not a metabolic issue, but maybe, you never know. It'll be really interesting to see if these studies work. And I'm proud of Lilly for asking and answering those questions because they're not really things that drug companies would normally do. So I hope it works.
Cool. I
Martin,
appreciate
sorry
it.
to
Thanks, man.
sorry to jump right back in, but I just thought of something and I'd hate myself if I forgot to ask you your opinion on this. When you look at like how things become decentralized, for example, you have like open source projects on GitHub, right? When it comes to software, do you think there's any pathway for that with peptides and all these experimental drugs where people are self-measuring, self-testing,
Yeah.
and then reporting their outcomes, sharing their health
A lot
data
of
and
thought,
biometrics?
has gone into this question. I think it's a good question, but I do think we have something a little like this, which is the scientific publication system, right? So like we're reinventing publishing papers. Now I understand what you're saying is decentralizing the clinical process, which is different. And yeah,
Yeah, phase one takes what, like 20 to 100
well,
people for a phase one trial, right? So
usually the benefit of phase one is you get the blood levels of the drug. So you have to do a blood draw and do assays with mass spec to see are the you know are there is this drug even surviving the bloodstream and for how long? That's what a phase one is for, and you can't do that at home. And so there's some diseases.
unless
There are a lot of
yeah,
diseases.
unless you have the kid from Elizabeth Holmes, right?
Even then, I think the mass spec is a very sensitive measurement. So those Theranos diagnostics were more trad diagnostics. This is like a very specialized assay, LCMS, GCMS assays to determine the presence or absence of a drug and its metabolites in the bloodstream. And then on the clinical trial side, even then, like many times you're dealing with a clinical assay. Depression you could do, right? You could do a clinical trial of depression decentralized, theoretically. Can you do one for asthma? Well, you need equipment to test for forced vital capacity and forced expiratory volume. That's not so easy to do at home. Now, there are little kits you can theoretically maybe get the patients to, take them all. But, at some point you're wondering, why don't we just do a clinical trial? And then for really important stuff like cancer, Well, yeah, you don't have a CAT scan to measure the tumor dimensions. You need an oncologist for that at a hospital. So there's probably some cases. It'd be a really good one is common cold. And again, the problem with common cold is it's a virus. Typically rhinovirus, but sometimes coronavirus. Making an antiviral is not trivial. You can make an exact antiviral for rhinovirus, but doing a decentralized trial would be really exciting there because you can do like 100,000 patients, whereas no drug company in their right mind wants to do that. But decentralized, you could do a huge amount of patients and maybe try to do some standards. I think that's an exciting idea. I don't think it's a crazy idea. I just think it's a question of like, certain situations where you can do it, like
Yeah.
common cold, where everyone hates having a cold. It'd be great if we could have, 1 or 2 days less of a common cold or flu. But the trials are a pain in the ass, but the drugs there are going to be lacking. But for depression, that'd be amazing. Just even stuff like
Yeah.
diet. Maybe certain diets or certain other things can influence depression. Well, we should do some studies. So I think having a GitHub or some other centralized repository for this is a good idea. And you never know what could come from it, even if it's just hypothesis generating for drug companies to say,
Yeah.
well, they did this decentralized thing and it looked like it worked there, so screw it. Let's put 50 million in to see if it works in a normal clinical trial. I think that'd be great. So, incentivizing people to do this and make it happen.
I mean, people do it out of goodwill, right? If there is something, an optimization or a cure for anything, I think humans, the same way with open source coding projects, right? If it has a net positive for humanity, people seem to be quite generous with their time.
Yeah, but
But I just wanted to know from your point of view, like what you mentioned some peptides on this, talk here. What are you not seeing from them that would convince you? I mean, if they had hundreds of people who reported positive effects or did a test
placebo.
before and after. Okay,
Yeah, you
got it.
need placebo. No placebo, no work. It's just, see
Yeah,
it over and over and over and over again. Placebo response, people want to believe it works, etc. It's just too unreliable. If you gave half the people, just blinding isn't that hard, And yeah, so placebo controlled, large number of patients, and some standardization. That's the nice thing about trials is that the way you measure it is standardized. The central reader is often really nice too. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for everything. I've been
thank
talking
you.
way too long. I have to get some rest. See you guys next time. Thank you for coming and listening.